What's up, guys? Welcome to October 26th as we dive into Mark chapter 12, verses 28 to 34. One of the teachers of religious laws was standing there listening to the debate. He realized that Jesus had answered well, so he asked, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" Jesus replied, "The most important commandment is this: Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these." The teacher of religious law replied, "Well said, teacher. You have spoken the truth by saying that there is only one God and no other. And I know it is important to love him with all my heart and all my understanding and all my strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. This is more important than to offer all the burnt offerings and sacrifices required in the law." Realizing how much the man understood, Jesus said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question: "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important: love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments." Mark chapter 12, verses 35 to 37. Whose son is the Messiah? Later, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple, he asked, "Why do the teachers of religious law claim that the Messiah is a son of David? For David himself, speaking under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until before I humble your enemies beneath your feet.' Since David himself called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" The large crowd listened to him with great delight. Matthew chapter 22, verses 41 to 46. Then, surrounded by the Pharisees, Jesus asked them a question: "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They replied, "He is the son of David." Jesus replied, "Then why does David, speaking under the inspiration of the Spirit, call the Messiah my Lord? For David said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies beneath your feet.' Since David called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" No one could answer him, and after that no one dared to ask him any more questions. Luke chapter 20, verses 41 to 44. Then Jesus presented them with a question. "Why is it," he asked, "that the Messiah is said to be the son of David? For David himself wrote in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet.' Since David called the Messiah Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" Mark chapter 12, verses 38 to 40. Jesus also taught, "Be aware of these teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head table at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be more severely punished." Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 22. Jesus warns the religious leaders. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees are the official interpreters interpreters of the law of Moses. So practice and obey whatever they tell you, but don't follow their example, for they don't practice what they teach. They crush people with unbearable religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden. Everything they do is for show. On their arms they wore extra wide prayer boxes with scripture verses inside, and they wore robes with extra long tassels. And they loved to sit at the head table at banquets and in the seats of honor in the synagogues. They love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplace and to be called rabbi. Don't let anyone call you rabbi, for you have only one rabbi, one teacher, and all of you are equal as brothers and sisters. And don't address anyone here on earth as father, for only God is heaven, and your father is for God in heaven is your father. And don't let anyone call you teacher, for you have only one teacher, the Messiah. The greatest among you must be a servant, but those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Luke chapter 20, verses 45 to 47. Then, with the crowds listening, he turned to his disciples and said, "Be aware of these teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head table at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be severely punished." Matthew chapter 23, verses 13 to 36. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You won't go in yourself, and you won't let others enter either. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cross land and sea to make one covered, and then you turn that person into twice the child of hell. You yourselves are blind guides. What sorrow awaits you, for you say that it means nothing to swear by God's temple, but that is binding to swear by the gold in the temple. Blind fools, which is more important, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And you say that to swear by the altar is not binding, but to swear by the gifts of the altar is binding. How blind! For which is more important, the gift of the altar or the gift that makes the gift, or the altar that makes the gift sacred? When you swear by the altar, you are swearing by it and by everything on it. And when you swear by the temple, you are swearing by it and by God who lives in it. And when you swear by heaven, you are swearing by the throne of God and by God who sits on the throne. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the most important aspects of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. Blind guides, you strain your water so you won't automatically swallow a knot, but you swallow a camel. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first wash the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will become clean too. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but filled on the inside with dead people's bones and all sorts of impurity. Outward you look like righteous people, but inwardly your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build tombs for the prophets your ancestors killed, and you decorate the monuments of the godly people in your life your ancestors destroyed. When you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would never have joined them in killing the prophets. But in saying that, you testify against yourself that you are indeed the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead and finish what your ancestors started, snakes, sons of vipers. How will you escape the judgment of hell? Therefore, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers of religious law, but you will kill some by crucifixion, and you will flog others with whips in your synagogues, chasing them from city to city. As a result, you will be held responsible for the murder of all godly people of the time, from the murder of righteous Abel to the murder of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you killed in the temple between the sanctuary and the altar. I tell you the truth, this judgment will fall on this very generation. Matthew chapter 23 verses 37 to 39. Jesus grieves over Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers. How often I have wanted you to gather your children together as a hen protects her chicks under her wings, but you wouldn't let me. And now look, your house is abandoned and desolate. For I tell you the truth, for I tell you this, you will never see me again until you say, blessings are the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Mark chapter 12 verses 41 to 44. The widow's offering. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowd dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surpluses, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. Luke chapter 21 verses 1 through 4. While Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people drop their gifts in the collection box. Then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 small coins. I tell you the truth, Jesus said, this poor widow has given more than all the rest of them, for they have given a tiny part of their surpluses, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. And so that's the end for today. The woman, the widow, we're all familiar with the story. It's all about the heart posture. Obviously, we know that 2 coins are not as much as a bag of coins, but the fact that this widow is willing to give up everything that she has left up to God shows a lot of courage, shows a lot of faith and love she has towards God. While these religious leaders, while these rich people, they give a lot, but they still have so much. They did not give all of their life up to God. And that's why it makes this widow's offering so special, is because of how obedient, is because of how much she loves God, that she's willing to give everything up for him. And so realize then that whenever we tithe, before we do anything religious, before we do any teachings about Christ, ask yourself, where is your heart posture? Because at the end of the day, heart posture is what's most important out of this whole thing. Like the religious leaders, they overperform. They are so obsessed with looking religiously righteous that Jesus says that they are literally sending people to hell. They're literally causing people to stumble because they're setting such a high expectations that nobody can reach. And then, yeah, Jesus, I think we read this before, Jesus grieves over Jerusalem, over the fact that the city where he loved so much, his chosen city, has disappointed him in more ways than majority of cities. It just reminds me that just because you go to church, that does not make everything righteous in the eyes of God, right? If God can't even consider his own house righteous, what makes us think that whenever we go to a church that's automatically righteous, well, that means that our church are more righteous than others. We have to learn to do a better job of cleaning up our own houses. And then Jesus kind of went on a rebuke on the Pharisees for everything that they have done. So what the first part he's talking about is how the Pharisees, they send prophets, messengers of Christ, messengers of God, to death through the ancestors, and how they are still doing that to this day. We are still doing this to this day. There'll be a lot of Christians that can't accept reality, that cannot preach the right words, helping people to draw closer. They're actually doing things that's drawing people away from God, and I would call them false prophets. If you're a Christian, if you're a pastor that supports abortion, right, that cannot be a good reason. Like, I don't care what kind of, and me and my Old Testament survey teacher were talking about this today. It's like at the end, we are all worshipful creatures, but that does not mean that we are designed. That does not mean that we are automatically going to worship God. That's not the case. We're gonna tend to draw away from God. That's why, with this life God has given us, we work on trying to get a closer relationship, start to worship Christ. But he says, and I try to ask him, like, what if it's like in the most dire circumstances that people do have to perform abortion? He said it does not matter at the end of the day. For God is a God of life, not a God of death. For God is a God of kindness and love and gentleness, not a murderous, not an evil, selfish God. And we really believe that life is so important. Life should be a number one thing in this world, But yeah, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they stone the former ancient prophets and messengers of God because they don't like what they are sharing. They don't like the truth, so they decide to kill instead of trying to repent of their sins. And then it talks about woe to them because of their outwardly performing, looking really righteous people, but inwardly their hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. And he gives like the metaphor of cleaning a cup. Nobody's gonna use a cup that's been dirty forever if all you do is clean it on the outside. At the end of the day, it's the inside that counts. You can't drink out of a cup that has not been cleaned on the inside for days at a time. And so it's just to suggest this whole clean up your heart, make you right with God, humble yourself before God before He comes and humble you. And then they were talking about, and Jesus talks about how they're doing a lot of swearing on the altar, by the temple, by the heavens. Whenever you swear, think about what exactly it even means to swear. It's like you're making this 100% promise that something would happen or won't happen. But who are we to say we know for 100% sure that something will or will not happen? But that's not even the worst. The worst part is using God into the equation, as if it doesn't work out, then God has to play a role. God does not have to play your games. God does not have to play our games. We don't get to tell God what to do by swearing in His name. In fact, He will punish us for doing that. It shows a lot of ignorance from our parts. So really think about who exactly it is that you're swearing to, or swearing by, and why. And remember, at the end of the day, as confident as you may or may not be, realize that you cannot be 100% sure of something will or will not happen. So stop acting as if you know. Stop acting as if we know what will or will not happen 100%. And then then it talks about then the crowds listening. He should be aware of these teachers of religious law. Yep, again, the religious leaders, they're here for attention. They're not actually here to worship God out of their own love for God. They only perform things. They only do things that seems to be all good, that they're going to receive the praises of this world. And like, if that's how they want to go about living their life, so be it. But realize that that is the only reward you get to get for your actions. You won't get any reward from God. And then it kind of went on about not having anybody in your life that you should be calling a teacher or father. Obviously, I don't know what that really truly means, but because I know a lot of Catholics do that. They call, and within that I even have a problem with, but it's not a day to go rambling on and on about the Catholics. It's not about Catholics. And it talks about how then Jesus is talking about the Messiah, how he is not the son of David as in like younger or anything like that, but it's because it just all happened. God designed it where Jesus is born in the line of David, and yet David in the past calls this Messiah as his Lord, which people back then did not understand. It's not about at the end of the day, it's not about Jesus' relationship with David from a human perspective, but from like a grand perspective, or from like a God, from the perspective of God. It's like explaining that at the end of the day, nobody is greater than the Messiah. We are to call him Lord, not the other way around. And then so kind of the last thing I want to touch on is loving. The greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. A lot of us, and then the second part is like similar to that of the first. But however, the second part talks about loving your neighbors as yourself, right? I think people keep throwing these phrases around and thinking that they are the same equal value, but they're not. Like truly, it is not. Because if it is, why didn't Jesus just mention both of them right at the same time? Why is it he said love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind and strength, and then to love your neighbor as yourself? It's to show the priority of God comes first and then human comes next. Alright, so if we decide to focus on loving people first, then we got the order upside down. You know, and that's the thing about God, is like when you start to love God, when you start to appreciate who God is and everything that he has done, and submitting your life to him, through that God will help you grow. God will teach you how to love people. It puts a whole new perspective of what it means to love people. And then so that's one of the things I want to talk about. But then the other part is, yes, it's loving our enemies important, and praying for them, and loving people loving our neighbors as we love ourselves, of course. But realize that if you love people for their evil actions, how is that loving God? Right? You can't love God by loving by loving the evil things of this world. I can never understand why people either get those things flipped upside down, loving their neighbor as they love themselves, or thinking that it's okay to love people so much for the evil actions that you somehow get this delusional or wrong ideology of saying that, oh God, I listened to you, you told me to love my neighbors, and I do love them, but what is your neighbor doing? Is your neighbor doing something that's gonna be pleasing God, that's gonna honor God, or be discouraging to God and be dishonorable to God. And so yeah, that's all I have for today. I hope what I shared is helpful, that you're really able to think about what it means to love your neighbors as yourself. Who do you love first, and what does that even look like to you? What does it look like for you to love God before humans? And I pray that I pray that you trust in me, that when you start to love God, when you start to appreciate who God is, and start to have a closer relationship with God, He will teach you how to love people the way that He wants us to love each other, not the way that this world is telling us to love each other. And so yeah, I love you guys, but the love of Christ is greater. And so go and honor God in everything that you do today.